I was in the ICU when my family used my savings for their dream trip. Then the revenge began. I never thought I'd spend my 80th birthday unconscious in a hospital bed while my family used my savings to sip cocktails on a cruise ship. But life has a funny way of waking you up, literally. And when I opened my eyes in that ICU, I remembered everything, especially the betrayal. My name is Dorothy Mae Henderson, though most folks just call me Dot. I've lived in Cedar Falls, Iowa for 63 years, ever since I married my Harold right out of college. We bought a little 2-bedroom house on Maple Street for $8,000. Can you imagine that? $8,000 for a whole house. Harold used to joke that we'd paid too much, but we raised our daughter Sarah there, watched her take her first steps on those creaky hardwood floors, helped her with homework at the kitchen table that's still there today. Harold was a good man, worked at the John Deere plant for 37 years until his back gave out. Me, I taught third grade at Lincoln Elementary for 40 years. 40 years of tying shoelaces, wiping noses, and teaching children that 2 + 2 = 4, not 5, no matter how much they argued about it. I loved every minute of it, even the difficult days when little Tommy Peterson would put gum in Sarah Mitchell's hair, or when the school board decided we needed to teach new math that none of us understood. We weren't rich, Harold and I, but we were careful with money. Had to be, on our salaries. We grew our own vegetables, canned peaches every summer, bought our clothes at the end of season sales. Harold fixed everything himself, the leaky faucet, the screen door that wouldn't close right, the old Buick that should have been retired 10 years before it finally was. We saved every penny we could, not because we were misers, but because we'd both grown up during the Depression. We knew what it meant to go without. When Harold died 8 years ago, massive stroke, went peacefully in his sleep, I thought I might fall apart completely. 52 years of marriage, and suddenly I'm eating dinner alone, watching television by myself, sleeping in a bed that felt enormous and cold. But Harold had always said I was tougher than I looked, and he was right. I adjusted. I joined the church auxiliary, started volunteering at the library's literacy program, kept my little garden going. The house felt empty, but it was still home. Sarah helped me through those first difficult months. She'd come over every Sunday with her husband Mike and the kids, Jake and Emma. We'd have pot roast and mashed potatoes, play board games, watch old movies. Sarah would help me sort through Harold's things, decide what to keep and what to donate. Mike would fix whatever needed fixing around the house. He was handy like Harold, good with tools and patient with problems. The grandchildren were my joy. Jake, now 19, had Harold's gentle nature and quick smile. He'd spend hours with me in the garden, learning to tell the difference between weeds and vegetables, listening to my stories about his grandfather. Emma, 17, was bright as a penny and twice as shiny. She'd curl up next to me on the couch and read aloud from whatever book she was studying in school, her voice clear and strong like mine had been in the classroom. We were a close family, or so I thought. Sarah called me every few days, stopped by at least once a week. Mike would shovel my sidewalk in winter, rake my leaves in fall. The children sent me handmade cards on my birthday, brought me their school pictures, asked me to come to their basketball games and school plays. I felt blessed, truly blessed, to have such a loving family. After Harold died, I became very careful about my finances. I met with our old lawyer, Harold Jameson, yes, another Harold, which caused endless confusion, to make sure everything was in order. We set up a simple will leaving everything to Sarah, established a power of attorney in case I ever became incapacitated, and organized all my important papers in a filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. I had 3 accounts at First National Bank, checking for monthly expenses, a small savings account for emergencies, and what I called my rainy day account. That last one had about $40,000, money Harold and I had saved over decades of careful living, plus the life insurance payout after he died. It wasn't a fortune, but it was security. Money for medical expenses if I got sick, or to help the family if they ever faced a real emergency. I'd mentioned it to Sarah once or twice, told her it was there if anything ever happened to me. "Mom," she'd said, "you're going to live to be 100. Don't worry about things like that. But at 80, you do worry about things like that. You worry about becoming a burden, about medical bills, about leaving your family with debts instead of something helpful." That money represented peace of mind. For me and for them. I was feeling good for my age, all things considered. A little arthritis in my hands, some trouble with stairs, but nothing serious. I walked to the grocery store most days, kept up with my housework, never missed a Sunday service at First Presbyterian. Dr. Morrison said my blood pressure was a little high, but nothing to worry about with medication. I took my pills, ate my vegetables, and figured I had several good years left. That's why what happened on that Tuesday morning in March came as such a shock. I was in my kitchen, making my usual breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, when I felt this strange flutter in my chest, like a bird was trapped in there, beating its wings frantically. I sat down at the table, thinking it would pass, but instead it got worse. The flutter became a squeeze, then a crushing pain that radiated down my left arm and up into my jaw. I'd seen enough medical shows to know what was happening. Heart attack. At 80 years old, living alone, with the nearest neighbor at work and my daughter 20 minutes away on a good day. I managed to call 911, though my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The dispatcher, a young woman with a calm voice, stayed on the line with me until the paramedics arrived. I remember thinking, as they loaded me into the ambulance, that I might never see my little house again. The last thing I saw before they closed the ambulance doors was my petunias, still in their pots on the front porch, waiting to be planted. The next few days were a blur of procedures and medications and machines that beeped constantly. Cardiac catheterization, they called it, threading tiny wires through my arteries to open blocked vessels. I was conscious for some of it, floating in and out of awareness like a cork bobbing on water. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about damage to my heart muscle, about how lucky I was to have called for help so quickly, about the touch-and-go nature of my condition. Sarah arrived at the hospital within hours, I was told later. She'd dropped everything at work, picked up the kids from school, and rushed to my bedside. Mike came straight from his job at the insurance office, still wearing his tie and dress shirt. They looked worried, genuinely frightened, and I felt a warm rush of love for them even through the fog of medication. "Mom, you scared us to death," Sarah said, holding my hand in the recovery room. "The doctors say you're going to be okay, but it was close. Really close." I tried to speak, but the breathing tube made it impossible. Sarah seemed to understand anyway. "Don't try to talk. Just rest. We're here, and we're not going anywhere." But that wasn't entirely true, as I would soon discover. Over the next several days, as I drifted in and out of consciousness, I became aware of conversations happening around my bed. Family discussions about logistics, about work schedules, about who would stay with me and when. Normal conversations that families have during medical crises, or so I thought. Sarah had taken time off work to be at the hospital, but I could tell the stress was wearing on her. She looked tired, distracted, constantly checking her phone. Mike seemed anxious too, though he tried to hide it behind forced cheerfulness and updates about how well I was responding to treatment. The children visited every day after school. Jake would sit quietly beside my bed, sometimes holding my hand, sometimes just staring out the window. Emma brought me flowers from my own garden. She'd walked over to my house and picked daffodils from the patch by the back door. Even unconscious, I could smell their sweet fragrance. It was during one of these family visits, about a week into my hospital stay, that I first heard something that made my blood run cold. I was lying still, eyes closed, listening to the rhythm of the heart monitor when I heard Sarah and Mike talking in low voices near the window. The doctors say she might not remember much when she wakes up, Sarah was saying. Something about the medications affecting short-term memory. They said it's common in elderly patients after major cardiac events. That might be a blessing, Mike replied. She won't remember how scared she was, how much pain she was in. Maybe, Sarah said, but there was something in her tone that didn't sound quite right. Mike, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What is it? That European cruise we've been talking about, the one we had to cancel because we couldn't afford it. I felt my heart rate increase slightly, and the monitor beeped a little faster. A nurse looked in, saw that I appeared to be sleeping peacefully, and continued on her rounds. Sarah, we can't think about vacations right now. My mother is stable, Sarah interrupted. The doctors said so themselves. And she's going to need weeks of recovery time, maybe months. She might end up in a nursing home for a while. What are you getting at? She told me about that savings account, Mike. The one with all her rainy day money. She said it was for family emergencies, for when something happened to her. The room was quiet except for the beeping of my machines. I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly, to keep my heart rate from spiking. You can't be serious, Mike said finally. Why not? She gave me power of attorney years ago. If she's incapacitated, I can access her accounts to pay for her care. And if some of that money went to other family needs, well, she'd want us to be taken care of too. Sarah, that's her money, her life savings. And when she dies, it's going to be our money anyway. She has no other family, Mike. We're it. And honestly, if we don't take this opportunity now, when will we ever get another chance? Jake's going to college next year. Emma's got 2 more years of high school. This might be our last chance to take a real family vacation before they're both grown and gone. I lay there, struggling to process what I was hearing. My own daughter, discussing my money as if it were already hers, planning to use it for a vacation while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed. But what if she recovers completely? What if she remembers everything and asks about the money? The doctors said memory issues are common. And even if she does remember, we'll figure something out. We'll tell her we used it for her medical expenses or for home modifications to help her recover. She'll understand. I don't know, Sarah. This feels wrong. What feels wrong is working our butts off for 20 years and never being able to afford the kind of trip other families take for granted. What feels wrong is watching our kids grow up without ever seeing Europe or going on a real cruise. What feels wrong is letting this opportunity slip away because we're too scared to make a decision. Mike was quiet for a long time. Finally, he sighed. How much money are we talking about? About $40,000. Enough for a really nice trip, the kind we've always dreamed about. Private balcony on the ship, shore excursions, fine dining. The works. And you really think she won't remember? Mike, look at her. She's 80 years old. She just had a massive heart attack, and she's on more medications than a pharmacy. The doctors said themselves that memory problems are likely. And even if she does remember some things, she loves us. She'd want us to be happy. Another long silence. Then Mike's voice, quieter now. When would we go? Next month. There's a Mediterranean cruise leaving from Rome, 14 days. I've already looked into it. We could fly over, spend a few days in Italy, then join the cruise. Jake and Emma are on spring break, so timing is perfect. What about your mother's care? She'll be in the hospital for at least another week, then probably a rehabilitation facility for a month or more. She won't even know we're gone. I wanted to scream, to sit up and confront them right there. But I was too weak, too connected to machines, too shocked by what I was hearing. Instead, I lay still and listened as my daughter and son-in-law planned to steal my life savings for their dream vacation. Over the next few days, I heard more pieces of their plan. Sarah researching flights to Rome, Mike calling in vacation time at work, both of them discussing what to pack for a Mediterranean cruise in April. They were excited, animated in a way I hadn't seen them in years. And why wouldn't they be? They were planning the trip of a lifetime, funded by money they thought I'd never miss. Meanwhile, I was working harder than I'd ever worked in my life just to breathe normally, to swallow liquids without choking, to remember what day it was. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about my recovery, but progress was slow. Physical therapy to rebuild my strength, occupational therapy to regain fine motor skills, speech therapy to address the slight slurring that had developed. Every day was a struggle. Sarah visited faithfully, bringing flowers and magazines, reading to me from the local newspaper, updating me on neighborhood gossip. She seemed loving and attentive, the devoted daughter caring for her ailing mother. But now I heard the false notes in her voice, saw the way her eyes would light up when she looked at her phone, noticed how she'd step out into the hallway to take certain calls. One afternoon, about 10 days into my hospital stay, she brought a folder of papers. "Mom, I need you to sign some things," she said, pulling a chair close to my bed. "Power of attorney documents, mostly. The doctors want to make sure someone can handle your bills and banking while you're recovering." I looked at the papers through foggy eyes. Legal documents, full of whereas and heretofore language that might as well have been written in Chinese. In my weakened state, struggling to focus, I could barely make sense of them. "What exactly am I signing?" I asked, my voice still hoarse from the breathing tube. "Just authorization for me to pay your bills, handle your banking, that sort of thing. Nothing major, just making sure your finances don't get messed up while you're in the hospital." I should have asked more questions, should have demanded to read every word, or asked for Harold Jameson to review the documents. But I was tired, so very tired, and this was my daughter. My only child, who I'd raised to be honest and responsible. I trusted her completely, so I signed. My signature was shaky, barely legible, but legally binding. "Thank you, Mom," Sarah said, carefully placing the documents back in the folder. "This will make everything so much easier." She wasn't wrong about that. 2 days later, they left for Europe. Sarah kissed my forehead and told me they were taking a short trip, just a few days to help Mike's brother move to a new apartment. She'd be back soon, she promised, and would call every day to check on me. But the calls were infrequent and brief. Sarah's voice sounded different, happy, relaxed, with unfamiliar sounds in the background. Music, laughter, the sound of waves. When I asked where she was, she'd say they were at a hotel near Mike's brother's new place, somewhere near the water. Meanwhile, I was making slow but steady progress. The doctors were pleased with my recovery, surprised by how well I was responding to treatment. My mind was clearing, my strength gradually returning. I was moved from the ICU to a regular room, then to the rehabilitation wing where I worked with therapists to regain my mobility and independence. It was Maria, one of the night nurses, who inadvertently opened my eyes to what was really happening. Maria was a sweet woman in her 30s, with 2 young children of her own and a warm, caring manner that reminded me of my best students' mothers. "Mrs. Henderson," she said one evening as she checked my vital signs, "I hope you don't mind me saying, but your family is having such a wonderful time on their trip. I saw the pictures on Facebook. That cruise ship looks absolutely gorgeous." My blood went cold. "Cruise ship?" "Oh yes, your daughter's been posting the most beautiful photos. They're somewhere in the Mediterranean, I think. The sunset pictures are just breathtaking." I felt my heart rate spike, and Maria immediately looked concerned. "Are you feeling all right? Should I call the doctor?" "No," I managed to say. "I'm fine, just... Could you show me those pictures? I'd love to see how they're enjoying themselves." Maria hesitated. "I probably shouldn't be looking at social media during work hours, but, well, just for a minute." She pulled out her phone and navigated to Sarah's Facebook page. What I saw there made me feel sicker than I'd felt since my heart attack. There was Sarah, radiant in a flowing sundress, standing on the deck of what was clearly an expensive cruise ship. Behind her, the Mediterranean sparkled like jewels. The caption read, "Living our best life in the Greek islands. Sometimes you have to seize the moment and make dreams come true." I scrolled through more photos with shaking fingers. Mike, lounging by a pool that belonged on a postcard. Jake and Emma dining at a restaurant that looked like it cost more per meal than I'd spend on groceries in a month. A tour of the Colosseum in Rome, a gondola ride in Venice. A sunset dinner on what appeared to be a private yacht off the coast of Santorini. The captions told the story. Grateful for this incredible opportunity. And creating memories that will last a lifetime. And, most damning of all, Grandma would want us to enjoy this. Life's too short not to live it fully. "They look so happy," Maria said innocently. "You must be so proud that they're able to take such a wonderful trip." I handed the phone back to her, my hands trembling. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm very proud." But inside, I was dying all over again. Not from heart failure this time, but from the crushing realization that my own daughter had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. She'd stolen my life savings to fund their dream vacation while I lay fighting for my life in a hospital bed. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind clearer than it had been since the heart attack. I thought about 40 years of teaching, of all the times I'd dealt with children who'd taken something that didn't belong to them. The first step was always the same: gather evidence. I asked Maria to help me access my bank account online. What I found confirmed my worst fears. My rainy day savings account, which had contained just over $40,000, was completely empty, withdrawn in one lump sum 3 days after I'd signed those power of attorney papers. The same day Sarah and Mike had left for their short trip to help his brother move. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call them up and demand explanations. Instead, I started planning. Because 40 years of teaching had taught me something else. When someone breaks your trust that completely, you don't just forgive and forget. You make sure it never happens again. I called Harold Jameson from my hospital bed. Harold was 85 himself now, mostly retired, but he still handled legal matters for a few longtime clients. He came to see me the next day, walking slowly with his cane but sharp as ever. "Dorothy," he said, settling into the chair beside my bed. "You look better than I expected, considering what you've been through." "I feel better than I expected too, Harold, but I have a problem, and I need your help." I explained the situation calmly, professionally, the way I used to explain classroom problems to parents. Harold's expression grew grimmer with each detail. "Do you have any proof of these conversations you overheard?" he asked. "No recordings, if that's what you mean, but I have their social media posts, the bank records showing the unauthorized withdrawal, and the power of attorney documents that don't actually authorize personal use of funds for vacations." Harold nodded slowly. "That's theft, Dorothy. Plain and simple. The power of attorney gives Sarah authority to handle your financial affairs in your best interest, not to fund family vacations. What are my options? You could press charges, fraud, theft, abuse of power of attorney. With the evidence you've described, it's a strong case. And if I don't want to send my daughter to prison, then you have other options. Change your will. Revoke the power of attorney. Set up new accounts they can't access. Make it clear that their inheritance has been adjusted to reflect their behavior." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Harold, I think we need to have a longer conversation." Over the next several days, while Sarah and Mike posted pictures of themselves dining in fine restaurants and touring ancient ruins, Harold and I worked on my new legal arrangements. We established a trust for my grandchildren that couldn't be touched by their parents. We created a new will that left Sarah and Mike each exactly $1,000 and a letter explaining why. We set up new bank accounts at a different institution and transferred my remaining assets there. Most importantly, we documented everything. Every social media post, every bank transaction, every detail of their unauthorized use of my money while I was incapacitated. If they wanted to challenge my decisions, they'd have to explain their behavior to a judge. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted them to understand not just the financial consequences of their betrayal, but the emotional ones as well. I wanted them to know that I knew exactly what they'd done and that their actions had consequences beyond anything they'd imagined. So I started pretending. When Sarah finally called from some picturesque Italian village, I let my voice sound confused, uncertain. I asked her repeatedly when she was coming home, as if I couldn't remember she'd already told me. I complained about being lonely, but in a vague, unfocused way. I needed them to believe I was still too disoriented to piece things together. How? "Are you feeling, Mom?" Sarah asked, her voice bright with sunshine and wine. "Oh, I'm confused about so many things, honey. The nurses say it's normal after what I went through, but I can't seem to remember much of anything clearly." "When did you say you'd be back?" "Just a few more days, Mom. Mike's brother needed more help than we expected. But I'll be home soon, I promise." "That's nice, dear. I hope you're not spending too much money on hotels." A pause. "No, Mom. We're being very careful with money." The lies came so easily to her now. They returned from their Mediterranean adventure. 2.5 weeks later, tanned and relaxed, carrying shopping bags full of souvenirs, Sarah rushed into my hospital room with tears in her eyes, apologizing for being gone so long. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. I know it seems like we were gone forever, but Mike's brother was in such a state, and we just couldn't leave him until everything was settled. I hope you weren't too lonely." I smiled weakly and squeezed her hand. "I'm just glad you're back, honey. I've been so confused lately. The doctors say it's normal after what I went through, but I can't seem to remember much of anything." Clearly, the relief on her face was unmistakable. She'd gotten away with it, or so she thought. Over the next week, as I prepared to be discharged from the hospital, they were attentive and caring. They brought me flowers, helped arrange for home health care, made plans for my recovery. Sarah talked about taking more time off work to help me, about moving me into their guest room until I was fully recovered. "Mom, we've been thinking," she said one afternoon as she helped me pack my things. "Maybe it would be better if you came to stay with us for a while. The house feels so empty when you're not there, and we'd feel better knowing someone was watching over you." I almost laughed. They wanted to watch over me, all right. Watch over me to make sure I didn't start asking inconvenient questions about my missing savings account. "That's very thoughtful, dear," I said. "But I think I'd recover better in my own home. You know how I am about my routines." "Of course, Mom. Whatever makes you most comfortable." But I could see the wheels turning in her head. How would they monitor my banking if I was living alone? How would they know if I started to remember things more clearly? I was discharged on a Thursday afternoon in early May. Sarah and Mike made a big production of getting me settled at home, bringing groceries, arranging my medications, making sure I had everything I needed. The grandchildren came by after school with welcome home cards they'd made themselves. "Grandma!" Emma threw her arms around me carefully, mindful of my still healing incision. "We missed you so much." Jake hung back a little, looking guilty. "Grandma, I'm sorry we weren't here more while you were in the hospital. Mom said you needed to rest and that too many visitors might make you more confused." "That's all right, sweetheart," I said, hugging him close. "I know you were thinking of me. If only he knew how much they'd been thinking of me, specifically, thinking of my bank account while they sipped champagne on the Mediterranean." That evening, after the family had gone home, Harold came to visit. To anyone watching, he was just my old friend and lawyer checking on my recovery. but we had work to finish. "How are you feeling about all this, Dorothy?" he asked as we sat in my living room, surrounded by get-well cards and flowers. "Honestly, angry, but also determined. They think they've gotten away with it, Harold. They think I'm a confused old woman who won't remember what they've done. And you want to set them straight. I want them to understand that actions have consequences. I want them to know that I know exactly what they did. And I want to make sure they never have the opportunity to do it again." Harold nodded. "Everything is in place legally. The new accounts, the revised will, the documentation of their unauthorized spending. The question is, how do you want to handle the confrontation?" I'd been thinking about that for weeks. I want them all together, the whole family. I want the children to hear this too, because they need to understand what their parents did. And I want it to be somewhere they can't just storm out and avoid the conversation. "Do you have something in mind?" "They've been talking about having a proper welcome home celebration for me. Sunday brunch," they said. "The whole family together to celebrate my recovery." Harold smiled grimly. "That sounds perfect." The invitation came the next day. Sarah called, bright and cheerful, to invite me to Sunday brunch at their house. "We want to have a proper celebration of your recovery, Mom. Just family, nothing too elaborate. Mike's going to make his famous pancakes and we'll have mimosas and fresh fruit. A real celebration of getting you back home where you belong." "That sounds lovely, dear. Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself, Mom. You've been through enough. Let us take care of everything." Oh, they'd certainly taken care of everything all right. Taken care of my life savings, my trust, and my peace of mind. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear. I dressed carefully in my best blue dress, the one Harold had bought me for our 50th wedding anniversary, and my pearl necklace. I wanted to look dignified for what was coming. Harold had offered to come with me for moral support, but I'd declined. This was something I needed to do alone, as a mother and grandmother who'd been betrayed by the people she loved most. I drove slowly to Sarah's house, taking my time, gathering my thoughts. The house looked the same as always, well-maintained colonial with a neat lawn and flower beds that Sarah tended religiously. My grandchildren's bicycles were propped against the garage, and I could see balloons tied to the front porch railing. "Welcome home, Grandma," the banner read. Sarah answered the door with a bright smile and a warm hug. "Mom, you look wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you. My mind is clearer than it's been in weeks." "That's wonderful to hear. Come in, come in. Everyone's here." The dining room table was set with Sarah's good china that I recognized because it had been mine, passed down from my own mother. Apparently, they'd been making themselves at home in my house while I was in the hospital. There were fresh flowers, cloth napkins, crystal glasses for the mimosas. It looked like a celebration, all right. Mike stood up from his chair at the head of the table, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday shirt and tie. "Dorothy, it's so good to have you back. You gave us quite a scare." Jake and Emma rushed over to hug me, and for a moment, my resolve wavered. These were my grandchildren, my beloved babies who'd brought such joy to my life. But they needed to know what their parents had done. They needed to understand that actions had consequences, even within families. "Sit down, Grandma," Emma said, pulling out a chair for me. "Mom made all your favorites, and indeed the table was laden with foods I loved: fresh strawberries, blueberry muffins, crispy bacon, Mike's famous buttermilk pancakes. Someone had even made my grandmother's recipe for coffee cake, which I hadn't had in years. We sat down to eat, and Sarah raised her mimosa glass. "To Mom," she said, "for being the strongest woman we know. We're so grateful you're still with us." Everyone raised their glasses, and I smiled graciously. "This is lovely, dear. Though I have to say, you all seem to be doing very well lately. New clothes, expensive brunch ingredients. I hope you didn't spend too much on my account." Sarah, And Mike exchanged a quick glance. So quick I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it. "Oh, we just wanted to celebrate having you back, Mom." "You can't put a price on family." "No," I agreed, taking a sip of my mimosa. "You really can't." The conversation flowed naturally for the first half hour. We talked about my recovery, their work, the children's school activities. Normal family conversation, the kind we'd been having for years around this very table. But I was watching, listening, waiting for the right moment. It came when Jake started talking about school ending soon and his plans for the summer. "I can't wait for vacation," he said, cutting into his pancakes. "This year was so cool, to see all those places we'd only read about in books." Emma nodded enthusiastically. "The Colosseum was amazing, Grandma. And that yacht we went on off the Greek islands? I felt like I was in a movie." The room went very quiet. Sarah set down her fork with a sharp clink against her plate. "Kids," Mike said quietly. "We talked about this." But Jake, bless his teenage honesty, kept going. "I know, but Grandma should know how awesome the trip was. That restaurant in Venice where we had dinner, the waiter said it was one of the most expensive places in the city, and the cruise ship had its own casino and everything." "Jake," Sarah's voice was sharp now. "That's enough." I set down my mimosa glass carefully. "Venice? Cruise ship? I thought you went to help Mike's brother move." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma kicked Jake under the table, finally understanding that they'd said something wrong. Mike cleared his throat and reached for his coffee cup with shaking hands. "Mom," Sarah started, but I held up my hand. "Actually, before we go any further, I have something I'd like to share with everyone." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. "I've been having trouble with my memory since the heart attack, as you know. So Harold suggested I start recording important conversations to help me remember them later." I pressed play on the recording Harold had helped me make. Not of the original hospital conversation, which I'd never actually recorded, but of Sarah and Mike discussing their trip at my kitchen table 3 days earlier, when they'd thought I was napping in my bedroom. Their voices filled the room, clear as day. I can't believe we actually pulled it off. $40,000 for the trip. Of a lifetime. She'll never know what happened to that money? Even if she does start asking questions, what's she going to do about it? The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room. Sarah's face had gone white as her napkin. Mike stared at his plate like it might offer him an escape route. Jake and Emma looked back and forth between their parents and me, confusion and dawning horror on their young faces. $40,000, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. My entire life savings, gone. While I was unconscious fighting for my life, you took every penny and spent it on yourselves. Mom, we can explain, Sarah started. Oh, I'm sure you can. I'm sure you've had weeks to come up with a wonderful explanation. But here's the thing, Sarah. I don't want to hear it. I stood up slowly, steadying myself on the table. The room was spinning slightly, but whether from emotion or medication, I couldn't tell. I want you to know that I've already spoken to Harold about this situation. The money you took constitutes fraud, and we have all the evidence we need to press charges. I've also made some changes to my legal arrangements. Sarah began to cry. Mom, please. We made a mistake, but we're family. We can work this out. Mistake? I looked at her with all the disappointment I felt. Sarah, a mistake is forgetting to call me on my birthday. A mistake is accidentally overwatering my plants. This wasn't a mistake. This was theft. Mike stood up, his face red with anger or embarrassment. We thought you were going to die. The doctors said you might not make it. We just wanted to honor your memory by taking that trip you always talked about. I looked at him with all the contempt I could muster. Mike, in 40 years of teaching, I heard every excuse imaginable from children who'd been caught doing something wrong. But you're not children. You're adults who made a conscious decision to steal from a dying woman. It wasn't stealing, Sarah protested through her tears. That money was going to come to us anyway when you died. We just used it a little early. When I died, I repeated slowly. Not if I died. When? You'd already written me off, hadn't you? Already planned my funeral, already divided up my possessions. Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Mom? Dad, is this true? Did you really steal Grandma's money? We didn't steal anything, Mike said defensively. We had power of attorney. We were authorized to handle her financial affairs. To pay my medical bills, I said firmly. To handle my legitimate expenses while I was incapacitated. Not to fund your Mediterranean vacation while I learned to walk. Again? Emma was crying now too, looking back and forth between her parents and me. I don't understand. You said we could afford the trip because Dad got a bonus at work. That was a lie, I said gently. Your parents paid for that entire vacation. With my life savings, every meal, every excursion, every night in those luxury hotels, it was my money. Grandma, Jake said, his voice cracking. We didn't know. I swear, if we'd known the money came from you. I know you didn't, sweetheart. You were children, being taken on what you thought was a family vacation. This isn't your fault. Sarah wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself. Mom, I know how this looks, but we can pay you back. It might take some time, but we can make installments. With what money? I asked. You've already proven you can't afford the lifestyle. You want on your own income. That's why you stole from me in the first place. We didn't steal from you, Mike shouted, losing his temper completely. You're our family. That money was for family emergencies, and this was an emergency. What emergency? Your emergency need for a Mediterranean cruise? Our emergency need to give our children experiences they'll remember for the rest of their lives. Our emergency need to have something good happen to this family after watching you nearly die. I stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the selfishness that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface charm. You watched me nearly die, and your first thought was how to profit from it. That's not fair, Sarah said. We love you, Mom. We were terrified of losing you. But not terrified enough to stay by my bedside. Not terrified enough to cancel your vacation. Not terrified enough to let my money stay in my account where it belonged. I turned to address my grandchildren directly. Jake, Emma, I want you to know that I've made arrangements for your future. You'll both be provided for when you're older, but in a way that your parents can't touch. I've learned that lesson now. What does that mean? Sarah asked, alarm creeping into her voice. It means I've changed my will, Sarah. You and Mike are no longer my primary beneficiaries. You'll each receive exactly $1,000 and a letter explaining why. The room erupted. Sarah screamed that I couldn't do this to them, that they were my only family. Mike accused me of being vindictive and cruel. But through all their protests, I noticed that neither of them denied what they'd done. Neither of them apologized for stealing my money. They were only sorry they'd been caught. Furthermore, I continued, raising my voice above their arguments, I've already filed a police report. The district attorney will decide whether to pursue criminal charges. You can't be serious, Mike said. We're your family. My family died the moment you decided my money was yours to take. I walked toward the door, my legs shaky but my resolve strong. Sarah followed me, grabbing my arm. Mom, please, we made a mistake, but we're family. We can work this out. Think about Jake and Emma. Do you really want to put them through a criminal trial? I gently removed her hand from my arm. I am thinking about Jake and Emma. I'm thinking about what kind of lesson they'll learn if their parents face no consequences for theft. I'm thinking about what kind of adults they'll become if they think family loyalty means looking the other way when someone commits a crime. So you're choosing revenge over family? I'm choosing justice over enabling. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to understand it. I walked to my car, my heart pounding but my mind clear. Behind me, I could hear arguing voices. Sarah, crying, the children asking confused questions. But I didn't look back. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Harold was waiting at my house when I got home, sitting in his car in my driveway. He took one look at my face and nodded. "How did it go?" he asked as we walked to my front door. "Exactly as expected. They're not happy, but they're not denying it either. They seem to think family loyalty should trump legal consequences." "Are you prepared for what comes next? The criminal proceedings won't be pleasant." I unlocked my door and we went inside, to the quiet sanctuary of my little house. "Harold, I've been thinking about this for weeks. Yes, I'm prepared. They need to understand that actions have consequences, even when you're family. Maybe especially when you're family." The legal proceedings moved forward over the next several months. Sarah hired a lawyer who tried various strategies, arguing that I'd given them permission, claiming the power of attorney-covered personal expenses, even suggesting that my memory problems made me an unreliable witness. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, social media posts, recorded conversations, witness testimony from hospital staff who'd overheard their discussions. In the end, they agreed to a plea deal. Sarah would serve 6 months in county jail and 5 years probation. Mike would serve 4 months and 5 years probation. They would also be required to pay full restitution, though the lawyer warned me it might take years to collect, if ever. The hardest part was the impact on Jake and Emma. They'd been devastated by the revelation of their parents' theft, confused, and ashamed and angry. Jake came to see me about a week after the confrontation, his eyes red from crying. "Grandma, I need you to know that I had no idea where the money came from. If I'd known..." "You would have what? Refused to go on the trip? Turned your parents in?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I hope I would have done the right thing, but they're my parents. I love them." "I know you do, sweetheart, and it's not your job to police your parents' behavior. But it is your job to learn from this experience." "What am I supposed to learn? That I can't trust my own parents?" "You're supposed to learn that being family doesn't mean you get to hurt people without consequences. You're supposed to learn that love and respect go hand in hand. You can't have real love without respect." Emma came to see me a few days later with similar questions and the same confused pain. I told her the same thing I'd told Jake. This wasn't their fault, but it was their lesson. "I don't understand how they could do something like this," she said. "I mean, you're their family. You're my grandma. How could they steal from you?" "I've been asking myself the same question, honey. I think they convinced themselves it wasn't really stealing because they expected to inherit the money eventually anyway. They told themselves I wouldn't remember, or that I'd understand if I did remember, or that it was somehow justified because they'd been through a stressful time. But those are just excuses." "Yes, they are. And that's an important lesson. There's always a way to justify doing the wrong thing if you want to badly enough. The test of character is whether you choose to do the right thing even when it's difficult." Both children asked about the trust I'd set up for them. I explained that they'd be able to access funds for college and other educational expenses, but the bulk of the money would be held until they were 30. Old enough, I hoped, to have learned the value of money and the importance of earning. "What you have." "Will we still be able to see you?" Emma asked. "Even with everything that's happened with Mom and Dad?" "Of course," I said, hugging her close. "You're my grandchildren, and I love you both dearly. What your parents did doesn't change that." And they did continue to visit, though less frequently and with a new awkwardness that broke my heart. They were trying to maintain relationships with both their parents and me, and I could see the strain it put on them. But I also saw them growing, stronger, more thoughtful, more aware of the complexity of human nature. The criminal trial made local news, though Sarah's lawyer managed to keep most of the details out of the papers. Still, word got around. Cedar Falls is a small town, and people talk. I faced some criticism from neighbors and church members who thought I'd been too harsh, that family disagreements should be handled privately. Mrs. Peterson from down the street stopped me at the grocery store one day. "Dorothy, I can't believe you had your own daughter arrested. Family is family, no matter what." "You're right, Helen," I replied. "Family is family, which is why it hurt so much when my family stole from me while I was dying in a hospital bed. Others were more supportive." My former teaching colleagues rallied around me, as did most of the church congregation once they understood the full story. Harold told me privately that he'd heard several people say they admired my courage in standing up for what was right, even when it was painful. Sarah and Mike served their jail time and began their probation. I heard through mutual acquaintances that the stress had put a severe strain on their marriage. Mike had lost his job at the insurance company. They'd quietly let him go rather than deal with the publicity of having an employee convicted of theft. Sarah had been demoted at her job and was struggling to support the family on a reduced income. They sent me a letter after they were released, jointly written and clearly composed with the help of their lawyer. They expressed regret for their actions and hoped we could find a way to reconcile for the sake of the children. But there was no real acknowledgement of the harm they'd caused. No genuine understanding of why what they'd done was so wrong. It read like a form letter, something designed to look good for the probation officer, rather than a genuine attempt at reconciliation. I didn't respond to the letter. Jake and Emma continued to visit, though our relationship had changed. There was a wariness now, a careful navigation around the topic of their parents. They were both excellent students. Jake earned a full scholarship to Iowa State University, and Emma was on track to graduate as valedictorian of her high school class. Sometimes, they asked about reconciliation, whether I might ever forgive their parents and restore family relationships. I tried to explain that forgiveness and trust were different things, that I could forgive the hurt while still protecting myself from future harm. "But don't you miss having a relationship with Mom?" Emma asked during one of our conversations. "I miss the relationship I thought I had with your mother," I said. "But that relationship was based on trust that no longer exists. Your mother showed me who she really is when she thought I wouldn't remember or couldn't fight back. That's not something you can unknow." As the years passed, I built a new life for myself. I continued volunteering at the library, joined a book club, took up watercolor painting. I made new friends among the other volunteers and discovered that I enjoyed my independence more than I'd expected. Harold Jameson died peacefully in his sleep when he was 88, 3 years after helping me through the legal proceedings. His son took over his practice and continued to handle my affairs, but it wasn't the same. Harold had been more than a lawyer. He'd been a friend who understood the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Jake graduated from college with a degree in engineering and got a good job with a construction company in Des Moines. Emma followed him to Iowa State, majoring in education with plans to become a teacher like her grandmother. Both of them remained respectful and loving toward me, though I could see they still struggled with divided loyalties between their parents and me. On my 85th birthday, Emma brought me a card she'd made herself, just like when she was little. Inside, she'd written, "Grandma, thank you for teaching me that doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing. I hope I can be as strong as you when I face difficult choices." I cried when I read it, not from sadness, but from pride. She'd learned the lesson I'd hoped to teach, even though it had come at such a painful cost. I still live in the same house on Maple Street, though I've made some modifications for aging in place. Grab bars in the bathroom, a ramp for the front steps, a medical alert system that I wear around my neck. I'm slowing down, as anyone would at 87, but I'm still independent, still sharp, still determined to live life on my own terms. Sarah sends me a Christmas card every year. No personal message, just her signature and a photo of the family. Mike remarried after their divorce. Apparently, the stress of the criminal proceedings and the financial strain had been too much for their relationship. Sarah lives alone now, in a small apartment across town, working as a retail clerk to make ends meet. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did, if I wish I'd handled things differently. The answer is complicated. I regret that it came to that point. I regret that my daughter chose theft over honesty, that my grandchildren had to witness their parents' criminality, that our family was torn apart by greed and betrayal. But I don't regret holding them accountable for their actions. I don't regret insisting that there are consequences for taking advantage of vulnerable people, even when those people are family members. I don't regret teaching my grandchildren that integrity matters more than keeping the peace. Would I do it again, knowing the cost? Yes, I would. Because the alternative, pretending it never happened, enabling their behavior, teaching my grandchildren that family loyalty means looking the other way when someone commits a crime, would have been worse. I think sometimes about what Harold used to tell me. Dorothy, you can't control what other people do, but you can control how you respond to what they do. Sarah and Mike chose to steal from me when they thought I was dying. They chose to lie about it when they thought I wouldn't remember. They chose to justify their actions rather than accept responsibility when they were caught. I chose to hold them accountable. I chose justice over family peace. I chose to protect future victims, including my grandchildren, from learning that theft is acceptable when you call it a family emergency. The money is mostly gone, of course. The restitution payments stopped after a few months when Sarah lost her job. I have enough to live comfortably, and the children's trust funds are intact, but the $40,000 they stole will never be fully repaid. But I have something more valuable than money. I have peace of mind. I sleep well at night knowing that I stood up for myself when it mattered most. I wake up each morning with dignity intact, knowing that I didn't let fear or family pressure convince me to enable criminal behavior. I've learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones you need to protect yourself from. I've learned that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. I've learned that being family doesn't give you license to hurt people without consequences. Most importantly, I've learned that you can survive the loss of people you thought you couldn't live without. You can build a new life, find new sources of joy, create new relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My garden still blooms every spring. The petunias I was watering when I had my heart attack are long gone, but I plant new ones every year. They're different flowers in different arrangements, but they bring the same beauty to my front porch. That's how I think about my life now. The family I thought I had is gone, destroyed by betrayal and greed. But I've cultivated new relationships, new sources of happiness, new reasons to get up each morning. They're different from what I had before, but they're real in a way that my old relationships never were. Sometimes Jake or Emma will ask if I'm lonely, living by myself in this big house. The answer is no, I'm not lonely. I'm alone sometimes, but that's different from being lonely. Loneliness comes from being surrounded by people who don't truly see you or respect you. Solitude comes from choosing to be with people who value you, even when that means being by yourself. They thought they'd buried me along with my bank account, that 80-year-old woman who trusted too easily and loved too blindly. But I came back stronger, alone, yes, but wiser. And when people ask me about my savings now, I smile and say, I spent it all on peace. And that, more than any Mediterranean cruise or fancy dinner or luxury hotel, was worth every penny.